Gentlemen, my name is John Harrel. I'm a retired Major General from the United States Army. I have a Juris Doctorate, a Master's in History. I'm a War College Fellow, Research Fellow for Ohio State University's Mershon Center for International Policy and Peacekeeping. I'm an expert on the Balkans, which I commanded for about 18 months. And this is my master's thesis, which I have turned into a book. Today we're going to discuss Julian the Apostate's campaign into Persia. That's why we call Julian's failure, because he lost.
The space bar will move.
Oh, the space bar will move?
That'll move forward.
There we go. First off, as a military person, I come to a problem differently than most scholars. Most scholars will pick up the ancient writings, start reading them, and analyze them and everything else. But guess what? There's a lot of problems with that. And these are just a couple examples. First off, Julian the Apostate, Battle of Strasbourg, 357 of the current era. 13,000 troops against 35,000 Almani, which is a German tribe confederation. When you think of the German tribes, you think of Gladiator in the first scene where the barbarians are half naked, yelling and screaming and jumping up and down and all that. The barbarians have changed. The Almani is a confederation of those tribes, and since they worked for the Roman army for about 100 years, their leaders are actually in full chainmail armor, just like a Roman soldier. Most of their warriors have some kind of experience with the Roman army. They know how to fight, and they're tough. But there's not 35,000 of them. How do we know? This particular battle was the Germans were pushed into the river, the Rhine River. We only recovered 6,000 bodies out of a force that's supposed to be 35,000. Well, we know ancient historians, especially Ammianus Marcellinus, which is a Roman military officer, he's very accurate, but at the same time they tried to make their hero, Julian, look tougher, better soldier, etc. So they put 13,000 Romans against 35,000 Almani. Now there probably were 35,000 Almani, most of them women, children, and old folks, and probably about a number of soldiers on the field were probably 10,000 or less. So, but when you count all the civilians, sounds like he's really taken on a really hard battle. Now this isn't unusual. If you go back and look at Caesar himself, Caesar's marching around, first battle against the Helvetians. He claims there were 92,000 men-at-arms in the warrior class of this tribe. The tribe actually had 360,000 people in it, and he was fighting these guys with 30,000 men. Actually, many who weren't well trained. And of course, he wins. We all know that because Caesar told us that. And our modern estimates are going, a tribe, say the Comanche, or any other warrior tribe, the maximum they can put in the field is about 20% of their total population, and that's every man that can carry a weapon. So we're talking probably there was only about 100,000 Helvetians, and so you're talking about 20,000 troops, which means Caesar outnumbered them. So when you think about barbarians and against civilized troops have a logistics system where the food is being brought up to them. A barbarian tribe doesn't have a logistics system. They got whatever on their wagons or in their fields. So they're going to have a smaller density of people in their armies because they can't feed them. Now, another good example which we want to take on, because when Julian is defeated in Persia, Roman authors got to come up with reasons why he was defeated. Here's a good general, not great. Julian was a good general, not as good as Caesar, better than Pompey. And he gets defeated by King Shapur II. So there's got to be a reason. Well, Ammianus Marcellinus is a military staff officer who was there at the site at the time, standing right there, right next to Julian as a staff officer. Zosimus, a pagan historian, Sozomen and Socrates, Christians, Libanius, an orator. These two guys are priests. Basically, the story comes that these guides led Julian and his army astray. And they got lost in the desert, and they got thirsty and everything else, and that was one of the reasons they started getting beat by the Persians over the next 60 days. We're going to show you why that's a fallacy. Now, to give you an example of something similar, Plutarch. Anybody heard of Plutarch? Plutarch's Lives? Does anybody know what Plutarch's goal was in writing?
Morality plays.
Exactly, the morality plays. He admits right up front, I'm not going to be accurate with my facts, because I want to show...
Neither is Thucydides for all that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So we know he admits up front he's not going to be accurate. So we have Crassus, a brilliant general against Spartacus, somehow becomes incompetent against the Parthians 20 years later. Same guy. How did he become incompetent? Well, he didn't. If you actually take the descriptions of the facts and put them back together, you'll find out Crassus wasn't incompetent. He was at the right place at the right time. He had a tactic for it, and it got screwed up in execution. And he, by the way, he held his position the day with all those Parthian archers. He held the position. The Parthians had to go away. It was the breakout that got him killed and his army wiped out. Not the battle where Plutarch is saying all these things that he botched the drill, the troops didn't get into Testudo quick enough, all this stuff. That wasn't the day that he lost the battle. He lost it 2 days later. Yes, sir?
Yeah, but if he has to break out at some point, because he can't stay stuck in the desert without, his logistics system infected.
We're going to talk exactly. The logistics, he's only 5 miles from a Roman-held city at this battle.
Yeah, but also the Armenians offered to give him,
Yep.
to guide him through the mountain passes where
Yep.
he would fare a lot better, but yet he refuses.
Did he or did he not? This is what I'm challenging you to do. Go back and look at that with some of the factors I'm going to give you today and see if you come up to the same conclusion that Plutarch comes at this battle. You'll find Plutarch is completely in error. He gives you the facts all jammed up, but his point is not that. His point is Crassus is what? An evil, grubbing, moneymonger. Crass. That's where we get the term from. That's what his point is. He's not giving you an accurate description of the battle. He's just giving you a bunch of facts, most of which are out of order. But again, that's what I challenge you on, because we're going to go the wrong way. We're going to talk a number of things here. I'm talking about the late Roman army. Okay? Most of the historians that you're going to read say that cavalry is taking over in the 300s, in the 400s, and this is the beginning of the Middle Ages, and it's all bullshit. It is not true. Cavalry is not becoming the dominant arm in the 300s and 400s, maybe by the 500s, but infantry is still the queen of battle at this time.
When does a stirrup come into play?
Oh, about 600.
Excuse me, sir, you can use these arrows as well.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Infantry is the queen of battle. We have a tendency to think that the late Roman army wasn't as good as its earlier predecessors. It was probably better. Training is done by regiments or legions. They had plenty of time to train. They had garrisons full of supplies. There was no reason that the late Roman army was any inferior to their ancestors in Trajan's time or Marcus Aurelius' time. Equipment's changing.
Question real quick?
Yes, sir.
I noticed that the depiction of the swords and stuff, roughly a third longer than what we
Yes.
think of as the Roman blade is.
Right.
Just real quick, I don't want to distract you. What drove that changeover from the thrusting technique to these guys are obviously shown hacking and slashing as well as lunging?
Well, first off, you have to need the spathe, which is the sword. It was the old cavalry sword. Okay. It's still a thrusting and cutting sword. There's a big debate until you actually look at how it's built with the points.
Right.
It is not designed strictly as a slashing sword. It is a point.
Right.
Now, when you go into a shield wall, and you're sticking, in the new Viking movie actually shows it better, and you're trying to stick through the shield wall, a 2-foot sword is going to come short.
Okay, that's what I figured.
Okay, so tactics are starting to change.
Got it.
Also, there's a large German contingent of recruiting. Germans are taller. Even we think of the Roman period and the Middle Age period that our ancestors were only 5'5". Well, these people are eating better than they do in the Middle Ages, and they're getting German recruits who are about 6 foot, 6 Roman feet, which is about 5'9", 5'10" in the current measurement system. So you got a bigger soldier. He's eats much better than his grandkids are going to in the future, and you got a change in tactics.
Longer reach.
Longer reach.
Carry better,
Yeah, there's a misconception that they became a spearman at this time. They actually threw the spear or used it against cavalry, depending on who their opponent was. Yes, sir.
Why did they abandon the pilum?
They abandoned the pilum about this time. They used the lanciera. They needed basically the pilum is an okay weapon against cavalry.
No, I mean they throw it at
No.
They throw it at the shield wall.
Well, no, they still had what they had now this time. They had darts that they threw.
Yeah.
They had javelins that they threw.
So it would offset the weight of the shield.
Yeah, and it's the same principles working with darts and everything else. The main difference, though, is your opponents are having more cavalry.
Okay.
Okay, the pilot's great against knocking down an infantryman's shield, but if you're trying to take on a cavalryman, it's not the best weapon. You want a lighter spear that can throw farther. But that spear, the lanciera, which they use, or the haste, which is a little heavier version, you can still throw it. So if you're fighting the Germans on hand-to-hand, you're going to throw your spear, all your darts, and then you're going to pull your sword, and you're going to form a shield wall and start hacking on each other. So tactics are changing as a result. The pila, someplace, we're not exactly sure when it starts disappearing, but it's around 350.
Well, I'd say it's got a nice visual impact too when you're handling unruly crowds.
Yeah.
The civilians see that nice big bladed leaves and they're like, I don't want to mess with this.
Yeah.
One quick last
Yes,
question.
sir.
And that is the depiction of, how shall I put it, the wild melees they have in Hollywood between two non-shield walls smashing into each other and whacking each other, individual hand-to-hand melee combat. My reading says basically that there's one side like the Romans at Rome against the Gauls. There's a Roman shield wall, and the Gauls hit it and bounced back away from it. Is that?
Yeah, that's the earlier period. Now this time the Germans are fighting just like the Romans,
Okay.
because a lot of them have served in the Roman army and then gone back home.
Basically, you've got two shield walls against each
Yeah.
other, but you don't have a bunch of individuals like out of some of these crazy movies where the hero is jumping around.
If you've broken down into individuals, you've lost.
That's what I mean.
Game's over.
Yeah.
You know, that thing. But let's talk about the arms and equipment and everything else. One of the things, the antique legion is what I call it, the 6,000, 5,000, 6,000 man army. This is one of the reasons that, our legion, this is one of the reasons that people think the late Roman army was less effective and that sort of thing is, we think in military terms, but you also got to think in political terms. In a 5,000 man antique legion, you had one appointee, the legate, the commander of the legion, was appointed by the emperor. You had 6 tribunes appointed by the Senate, the emperor, or could have been the cousin of the legate. In the later period, the same 5,000 person force, starting at the bottom, and the legions are only 1,000 men or less, they're commanded by a tribune. So in a 5,000 men force, you got 5 tribunes commanding 1,000 men. Those legions are brigaded together normally with a count. And then you normally, on a 5,000 man army, you normally have a count, a senior count, normally 2 in charge. Now, when you start counting up the imperial appointees, you've got 9 senior officers commanding the same force that in the earlier empire only had 1 political appointee. That means there's 9 people there to keep an eye on each other, so no one decides, I want to be emperor. So when you start looking at this later organization, we have a tendency to focus on the military side. The political side is just as important.
Like the American Civil War, the political generals.
You got it. And they're
political officers in the Soviet.
But they're well, actually, Now, to be fair, all of these guys are veterans. They had to go through a system, so you didn't get a regimental commander unless you were at least 35 years old. Okay, and you've had a lot of combat experience, and you spent time in the Officers Academy, the Damascus Regiment. You're appointed by the Emperor. So whose loyalty are you to? The Emperor that appointed you. 9 guys loyal to the current Emperor are commanding the 5,000 force that goes to Britain. You don't got to worry about them revolting. In the old days, the legate may revolt, get a couple other legates, and now you got a full 30,000 man army. Now you're talking about 50 people in a 30,000 man army or more that have been appointed by this current Emperor. So revolting is harder in the later period. But of course we do have lots of revolts. So happens. Okay.